Hi folks, Matt Easton here, Schola Gladiatoria and also Easton Antique Arms. So as well as teaching historical fencing and running this YouTube channel talking about military history and martial arts and combat and stuff, I'm also an antique dealer as well. Now, I buy lots of stuff in auction, therefore also I buy them at fairs and directly from house sales and all this kind of stuff. So I acquire antiques from lots of different places, but sometimes when I buy things through auction, I buy job lots. So a lot can contain several different objects. Now, in this particular lot, I wasn't entirely sure of everything that was in the lot because I only had one photograph to go from. And in fact, I was buying the lot based on another object which isn't featuring this video. And I decided to bid a certain amount of money for that object and then take the other things as whatever they were when they turned up. Now, what's interesting here is one of these objects looked like pretty much a rusty piece of metal, which is what it is. But when it turned up, I had a sort of pleasant surprise. Not because it's worth a huge amount of money or it's extremely rare or anything like that, but simply because it wasn't what I expected it to be and it was more interesting. So what is this mystery object? Well, here is the rusty piece of metal in question, and you can quite quickly hopefully see that it is a sword blade, which I knew it was a sword blade, but I didn't know exactly what kind of sword, what age, blah blah blah. So let's see a few details. So you can see the approximate length of the blade is about 35 inches. You can work out the metric for that. But so it's a fair length. It hasn't really lost, okay, so it's got some rounding at the tip there, but it's only lost maybe half a centimetre of the tip. Notice I switched between imperial and metric. Welcome to the UK. And you know, it's got a nice distal taper, starts off at about 8mm thick. Tapers down throughout the blade, and I'm not going to flex it too much because obviously it's been subjected to quite a lot of corrosion, but you can see it's still got flex in the blade. It is a springy blade. It has one relatively narrow central fuller which runs up to about there, and then after that portion of the blade becomes lenticular section, I would call it. And it has a small ricasso about 1 centimetre long down here. It has the remnants of what appears to be a crossguard that you can probably just about see there, if I can get it to stop focusing on my face and focus on the sword instead. And then a pommel. Now, the first thing that I noticed actually about identifying this sword was the pommel. And you will notice, see, it's got a hole on the side there. Oh, and look, another hole there and another hole there, but no hole there. In addition, so that's the first important clue, and some of you, the real sword aficionados, will already know what type of sword this was, or is, based on those three holes. But you'll also notice on this remnant of the crossguard here, there is a rivet there, and there's the remnants of another rivet over here. So there was, in fact, there's a piece of metal still attached here. So this sort of little section that's like a mini crossguard or quillon block was attached to another piece of metal. So can you work it out, folks? Can you work out what kind of sword this is? Well, I'll break the news to you if you didn't know. It's a 17th century English mortuary hilt. Obviously this was found in England. I live in England. In fact, there is a little maker's mark. I don't know if you'll be able to see it in this light. If I can get to focus. Just about there. You can just hopefully see with the reflection of the light. I haven't researched that maker's mark, but it is one that I think that I've seen on 17th century blades before. Now, how do I know this is a mortuary hilt? Well, the combination of these two elements here. Mortuary hilts are, as you might guess from the name, a type of hilt, so they could be coupled with various types of blade. Usually, as it happens, they were coupled with this type of blade. That is a double-edged, should we call it a narrow broadsword blade? So it's like an arming sword, like a narrow medieval arming sword, similar kind of length, a little bit narrower than we'd usually get in the medieval period. And they can also be partnered with a backsword blade, which would be single-edged with a thick, flat spine down the back. Sometimes you even find them with more kind of rapier-ish blades, but usually they're with cut and thrust blades. So how do I know this is a mortuary hilt? Well, simply those three holes, and I will show on screen, those three holes usually have screws going into them which connect sidebars and a front knuckle bow coming from a half basket, or really it's a full basket hilt actually, but a shell section here which branches up into three extensions that join join the pommel and are screwed into the pommel, and then between those bars are lateral or horizontal, shall we say, bars, forming a full basket. Sometimes inside that basket there would be a leather or cloth fabric liner to prevent points and even cuts slipping through the bars quite so easily. But essentially it's a basket guard. Now this sword is kind of a complete sword, but missing its basket essentially. So the basket has either rusted off, broken off, who knows, been lost to the mists of time. And of course the grip has gone as well. An interesting little note is you might be able to see on screen that the corrosion on the tang, that's the portion of the blade that goes through the grip, is heavier and deeper than it is on the blade. The reason for that is almost certainly because moisture was contained within the grip for a long period of time, and therefore the corrosion was more extensive on this tang, and this tang's very fragile now. That being said, it hasn't actually lost an enormous amount of the size, and people who are interested in the modern reproduction of swords and modern replicas of swords should note how narrow and small this tang is, and this is true of lots of antiques. Generally speaking, the steel blade is scarf welded or cleft welded to an iron tang. So in fact, that tang won't be brittle in the same sense that the hard steel of the blade is. And so tangs on historical swords are more prone to bending than necessarily snapping. So that's one reason why they can make them narrow and different geometry. But also simply because these swords were sharp swords intended to be used for a fight. They weren't used week in, week out for fencing practice or reenactment or anything like that. So they, in their lifetime, you know, they would be expected to serve through one fight, one battle, maybe a series of battles, but they might not actually hit things very much, and so they weren't quite so obsessed with tang strength perhaps as we are with modern recreational and sporting swords. But nevertheless, there we go. A relatively narrow tang, as we find on lots of historical examples. So a kind of rare treat really, and a rusty old sword blade. I kind of from the photos thought it might be a Napoleonic era spadroon at best. I couldn't possibly have imagined that it would turn out to be a mid-17th century sword. So these mortuary hilts were used in the English Civil War in the 1640s. The swords themselves were around from about the 1630s all the way through to about the 1660s, 70s. So this is a nearly 400-year-old, let's say 350 to 400-year-old relic that I have in my possession. In due course, I'll undoubtedly stick it on my website, which is linked below, for Easton Antique Arms, my antique business. But for now, a very interesting curio, and I thought I'd share it with you guys, an interesting thing to see. Thanks for watching. Hope I'll see you again soon on the channel. Cheers, folks. Thanks for watching. We've got extra videos on Patreon. Please give our Facebook a like and subscribe if you haven't already. Cheers, folks.